question is about medical marijuana. Does the decision by Montana voters in 2004, does that give them any added protection from federal prosecution, or does the federal prosecution just not consider what Montana voters decided? And then also, is Montana actively, do they participate in prosecuting medical patients?
So you got a federal question and a state question, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not the moderator, but I'm going to let Josh answer the federal side, because that was actually my question. I was going to stand up there and ask that very question. So I appreciate you asking that. Let's see what Josh has to say about that. If he wants to pick on these sick people in Montana who need their medicine, let's see what Josh is going to do about that. Okay, Josh, take it away.
Are you sure you're done?
I'm never done, Josh.
The short answer to your question is no. Montana's law does not protect medical marijuana users, marijuana growers, marijuana sellers, marijuana conspirators. It has no effect on a federal prosecution whatsoever because of what's called the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause basically means the feds win. Now, are we going to go arrest a bunch of people who are smoking marijuana under Montana's medical marijuana statute?
Start your tape recorders. Get them started. Go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
No. You know, my job as a federal prosecutor is to prosecute drug trafficking organizations. I have never in my entire career as a federal prosecutor, before Montana's medical marijuana law or after, ever prosecuted somebody for having a user amount of marijuana or for smoking marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean I can't. Under the federal law, I would have the authority to do that. And if you fire up a joint in the post office, for instance, you might get prosecuted by me. And the Forest Service is where we really have some issues, because there's a lot of federal land out there, and I prosecute marijuana cases off the federal forest. So somebody had asked earlier, how big is big in a marijuana grow? Well, it's kind of an amorphous, difficult question. I'll tell you, the federal statute. So I've never prosecuted anybody as a federal prosecutor for possessing marijuana. But I prosecuted a lot of people as a federal prosecutor for growing marijuana, or for.
What about 6 plants and 1 ounce?
Or for selling marijuana, or for being engaged in conspiracies to sell marijuana. You got 6 plants on the national forest.
Yeah.
You might get prosecuted in the federal system.
What if you're growing it for your own, like, cancer?
We will probably, somewhere around the country, because Montana's not the only state that has a medical marijuana issue, someday we will face the issue of what do we do with someone who's growing a lot of marijuana, but is growing it somehow under the guise of, or maybe even legitimately, for medical marijuana users. And I don't know what's going to happen.
But haven't we faced that in California? I thought that California has a medical marijuana statute, and then the feds went in and shut down all of the distribution houses or places where people with medical marijuana needs. So I mean, I think we are facing. I think clearly the feds, in that situation, took the position that the federal government has their own interests. They are a separate sovereign, and they have the right to assume that. And the Supremacy Clause means that you're not going to be protected by the state law.
And those were either places where people went to school. What's that?
Is the federal government pursuing that in Montana?
Yeah, that's the question, right, Josh? The U.S. Supreme Court said you can. The U.S. Supreme Court said you can't. Are you? Will you, if they're growing in their house? Forget the Forest Service, guys. We'll do that. In your house, though, if you're growing 6 plants for yourself.
And remember, I'm not here speaking for the federal government. So, you know, and I had this question just a couple weeks ago from a lawyer, saying, what's going to happen to my client? I can't make any promises that it's not going to happen. I hope not. You know, I don't want to prosecute someone who's growing 6 plants in their house. I want to prosecute drug trafficking organizations. Now, Montana's law, I believe, allows people to grow marijuana for other people. Yeah. And at some point, if you get big enough, Are you a drug trafficking organization? Maybe so. Maybe I will prosecute somebody there. I'll guarantee you this, though. Montana's law will not protect you from a federal prosecution under any circumstances if the feds, I or some other assistant U.S. attorney or the U.S. attorney or the attorney general decides to bring a case.
And Josh, that's important. You need to know that he's right. Federal law trumps. So the Montana law, the Medical Marijuana Act, does not protect you from federal prosecution. You had another question. That was a federal question. You had a state question too.
Is the state actively participating when
Oh.
the federal government comes in?
Oh, is the state participating?
I'll answer that. You know, across the state of Montana, like in many states, state and federal law enforcement officers in the drug area work in conjunction with one another. And they are formed into task forces that receive federal money. There's one here in Missoula, there's one in Kalispell, there's one in Billings. They're called the HIDA, High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Forces. We receive federal money for that. Officers from the Sheriff's Office, from the Missoula Police Department, DEA, up in the Kalispell area, I think officers with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, local officers up there, they all work in conjunction to investigate drug crimes generally. Some of them come to me and get prosecuted federally, some go to state agencies and get prosecuted. And that's sort of why I wanted to make that point earlier about the distinction. Just because a state officer ends up working on a case doesn't mean that the state law is somehow going to attach and protect you if the case gets prosecuted in federal court. I've prosecuted cases that are investigated entirely by state agents in federal court, and Montana law does not have offers no protection for any defendant in those situations.
And that's true with respect to drug crimes, that's true, but, you know, for like an assault crime or, you know, a regular state law crime, the state constitution does provide you a lot of protection. I wanted to mention that...
In state court.
In state court, that's correct. I wanted to mention that a lot of what Josh is saying is exactly right with respect to the present state of the law. But there are a lot of people and a lot of organizations working to change the present state of the law, and the ACLU is one of them. And there's lots of information out here. One organization that's working very hard to stop this war on drugs, this mythical and imaginary war on drugs, is called the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I don't know if you've seen any of the speakers that we've had on those guys, but there's a really interesting pamphlet out there, and they also have some really good information. Anyway, I want to refer you to the table out here. We think we certainly believe that the war on drugs is not a good way to spend our money, not a good way to do our law enforcement. We need to change that policy.